and I'm the platform consultant based in Southeast Asia. I've been with Elsevier for about 6 years now, and it's been a pleasure working with many different institutions, talking to them and speaking to them about how they can get their articles, their papers to be published, how they can write a great paper and to get it published. So without further ado, let me walk you quickly through on how science, technology, technical, and medical publishing has been like. There are approximately about 5,000 STM publishers in the world, publishing over 22,000 peer-reviewed journals and generating up to 3 million peer-reviewed articles each and every single year. Over at Elsevier, we receive over 2 million submissions every single year. In 2020, we actually received about 2.5 million submissions per year. To help us manage the peer review process for this, we have approximately about 830,000 reviewers with over 72,000 editorial board members and over 20,000 editors. I've spoken to quite a number of editors, and one thing that they always have mentioned is that it's always very tedious and not easy to find the best peer reviewer for the articles that which the author has submitted and published. So they spend an inordinate amount of time looking for the most appropriate peer reviewers to conduct the peer review analysis for the submitted articles. Of these 2.5 million articles, Elsevier publishes over 560,000 new articles in 2020. So people would always ask me, hey, Nicholas, what is the rejection rate of articles at Elsevier? Is it 100%? And I would jokingly say, no, it's definitely not 100%. It's probably about 80%. But jokes aside, the main reason why the rejection rate is so high is really because we place an inordinate amount of emphasis to publish only the best possible articles. At the same time, when receiving up to 2.5 million submissions, we have to go through a lot of manuscripts to make sure that only the very best articles are actually sent through for peer review before they are eventually being published. Elsevier has over 18 million articles available across 4,000 journals, and we publish and disseminate all this information. I believe most of you over at Casasat will have access to Science Direct. You'll be downloading it. We have over 700 million downloads by 11 million researchers across 120 countries. And this is really a very large amount of a global community that leverages on Elsevier content. We talk about the peer review process. And one thing which I think you might be interested in over here is that authors would submit articles to the journal. The journal editor from Elsevier will be the one screening the paper, and the rejection rate would be anywhere from 30 to 70% after screening. There will be a reviewer. It's only after screening it that the journal editor would send this over to the reviewer. The reviewer will pass their comments on this, and the editor would constantly assess these reviews before actually making revisions, before actually consolidating the information to either reject the article or to actually accept it without any revisions required. So it's actually very interesting to observe all this information, and I thought this was something that you might be interested in when you're conducting the peer review process. So the question people tend to always ask would be, what is the specific publisher's role in the entire process? And I think it is actually very crucial to share this with you. Over here at Elsevier, the registration process is really crucial because this is the timestamp to officially note who has submitted their scientific results first. Because publishers are not involved in the entire process, they are standing outside the process. They are in the best possible way to be a third-party arbiter to make sure that they are the ones who can actually note the timestamp without prejudice nor favor. Certification is very crucial because we see that there's a lot of information in the world today. We observe that there are a lot of people saying many things. The question here, what is actually scientific accuracy? What is actually unbiased fact, right? So which is why the certification is so crucial, because now the publisher, together with the editor and the peer reviewers, will make sure that peer review is conducted to ensure the validity and the integrity of submissions. So this is very crucial because now you can really rely on the fact that this journal article has published scientifically verified facts that you can definitely rely on and leverage on to do your research. As publishers, we disseminate this, we provide a medium for the scientific discoveries and findings to be shared, not just only internally, but externally into the world. We need to preserve the minutes and record of science for posterity so that in this day and age, these records will be preserved forever, for eternity, right? Because it's so much easier to have a digital record of this. We are able to enrich articles with multimedia tools and to connect to other resources as well. And this is something that we constantly look at and we think is really useful too. Over here at Elsevier, we actually, because we have so many journals, what do we do on occasions is that we actually have article transfer services, which reduces the time to publication, which reduces the referee fatigue, and which also reduces the editorial workload. Sometimes we may do different types of transfers, either pre-review, post-review, or recommended acceptance. A pre-review happens when an article is offered a transfer before the peer review. It contains no guarantee as to how the article will be treated by the receiver. The post-review is offered transfer before the post-review, which once again contains no guarantee for how the article will be treated. But sometimes we do have a transfer recommendation acceptance, where acceptance is guaranteed following transfer. This is also known as a transfer acceptance and a direct acceptance. I thought it'd be interesting to share sharing guidelines with you because many of you here will be leveraging on, say, Mendeley or ResearchGate and other portals to share your research with. So over at Elsevier, we support authors to share your work at every stage of the publication process in terms of a pre-submission, after the acceptance, after publication, and after embargo period. So under the pre-submission, your preprints can be shared anywhere at any time. What I would say is that make sure when you're checking the journal, make sure that you're always checking out on their preprint policies, and this information is always available on the journal homepage. We'll be talking about the journal homepage multiple times, and I can't begin to emphasize how crucial this journal homepage is for you. It really makes a life of difference. After the acceptance, the author manuscripts can be shared privately with students or colleagues for their personal use. You can share this privately on institutional repositories, on your own personal website. You can use this to refresh your preprints on archive and repack, maybe sometimes privately on commercial partner sites. It's after publication that Go Open Access articles can be shared anytime, anywhere on non-commercial platforms or via commercial platforms if you have a CC BY license. If you have a subscription article, you can share this as a link to the original article, or you can share this privately with students or colleagues for their personal use or privately on commercial partner sites. You can't share this publicly. I can't begin to emphasize this. It's only after embargo period for some journals where the manuscripts can be shared publicly on non-commercial and commercial partner sites. So in other words, in all cases, your preprints and accepted manuscripts should not be added or enhanced in any way to appear more like or to substitute the final published journal article. All your posted articles should link to the final version via your DOI, your digital object identifier, and the posted author manuscripts need to have a CC BY and CND user license before you can actually share it. Okay, now let's talk about editorial structures, right? We talk about publishers. What do editors do? Sometimes when you go to a journal homepage, you observe that there are many, many different editorial structures with many titles used, which includes the editor-in-chief, the executive editor, the section editor, regional editor, handling editor, managing associate, assistant, guest, deputy editor, right? Many different things, but they essentially conduct the same function. Sometimes we look at the editorial advisory and the executive board as well. And these are people who assist the editors in terms of setting this up too. And last but not least, you also have the publisher. So the publisher works together very closely with the editors, and the authors would have to work with the editors as well. So what happens is that when authors submit their manuscripts to editors, editors would have to all source for the appropriate referees before they can actually start liaising and getting in contact with the authors. Referees don't contact authors directly, if you observed, right? Referees communicate primarily with the editors, and it's only after that the peer review process has been conducted that the editor-in-chief can communicate with the authors. One thing I'll always say is that when you're submitting your article, please, please, please always read the author guidelines. The editors would sometimes ask for very specific information. The other thing which I will also want to say is that when you are submitting your manuscript, you must make sure that your manuscript fits within the aims and the scope of the journal, right? Because editors, reviewers, and readers, they want to receive well-presented manuscripts. What happens is that under submission, the first important thing is that technical checks will always be conducted first, right? In terms of grammatical error, right? I know some editors who chose to reject articles outright because they picked up 7 grammatical errors within the abstract. Maybe it's a bit harsh, but you can understand where they're coming from, because if you cannot even submit a grammatically accurate abstract, it really shows what little care you have for the rest of the paper. So be very specific about that. Other technical checks that occurs would include plagiarism, which is an ethical violation that we take very seriously. We'll talk more about this subsequently in this workshop. The next thing would be to check the suitability of the language. You will have to assess the scope in terms of the article type, the article topic, or the impact and interest. Sometimes if you don't fulfill all these criteria, you get rejected at desk. But if you do fulfill all these 3, technical, language, and scope, then the editor would send it over to start searching for the appropriate peer reviewers. One other thing which we think is a real problem is that sometimes when you're searching for reviewers, you may not be able to find reviewers, but sometimes you may also find the correct reviewers who may also reject you because they may not be able to reply to you in the fixed time that was agreed upon. And then this is when you would have to look for new reviewers again. And sometimes when you search for new reviewers, this would actually add on to the timing for the length of the whole submission process as well. So this is a reason why sometimes your articles would go on to be reviewed a lot longer than it seems to have to be. Also, when you start and complete the review, sometimes there will be major and minor revisions, right? That has to be done for the paper. It's almost impossible and very, very, very rare that an article would be accepted without any sort of review. In this case, a major or minor revision. Sometimes you have a recommended transfer. Sometimes you may be rejected. But after through an entire process, this is when the article will be accepted. So what editors also do will be to commission papers, to promote the journal, to handle publication ethics, to respond to queries about ongoing submissions. You know this, right? Because sometimes when your article has not been returned to you within maybe 2 or 3 months, you get a bit antsy and you probably want to contact the editor. Hey, what's going on with my article? Is it doing good? What's happening? So editors would also have to reply this as well. But editors also would have to work with publishers on the journal strategy on how they can grow the journal moving forward for the next coming year. Editors find referees through their networks or knowledge. For instance, they may approach the editorial board because they're subject matter experts. They may also look for references within the paper. One thing which they do is to look for recommendations within the cover letter. There is a good chance that a nominated referee will be used so long as they are not affiliated with the authors. So you have to choose very wisely. And this is also one of the parts where I'll talk about later as to why a cover letter is so important. Elsevier, what Elsevier does is that we provide a really powerful search tool within the editorial platform, EES, the Elsevier editorial service. What happens is that editors will be able to search for appropriate referees on this platform so that they would help them to expedite their work. This is something really useful, and I've heard multiple editors sharing with me on how useful the EES has been for them. Also, one other thing that we'll talk about again and again will be to make sure that your title, abstract, and keywords are highly suitable, because this will help to identify the referees. Don't use unnecessary buzzwords because they're popular. This will delay the process, and these buzzwords may eventually be removed and no one will know this. So make sure that you look and choose the best possible keywords for this too. I'll talk more about this later on as well. And also, okay, this goes on to the next stage. Are you ready to publish? Well, this is a very existential question, and then we really have to dig deep and delve deeper to uncover this. So you need to ask yourself some questions first. When you're considering all this information, you need to ask yourself, have I done something new and interesting? Is my research work very illuminating? Is it new, right? The next question you want to ask is, have you provided solutions to difficult problems? Ask yourself this question. Has your research question been answered by yourself? The next point, have you checked the latest results? Are you sure that the results that you have are the latest ones and no one else have published this? Have you verified the findings as well by doing double, triple, quadruple checks on this? And do the results fit? Do your research answer and tell a story that your research queries have actually instigated? So you need to ask yourself all these questions. And then this is the point where you can use a seesaw, right? To do a cost-benefit analysis. Are you actually ready to publish? If my work is slightly outdated, if my work has some duplication, and if there are incorrect conclusions, maybe I'm not ready to publish yet. Maybe my work has no scientific interest. But if I find that there are original results or methods, if there are significant enhancements on the published work, or sometimes if there's an up-to-date review of a subject or field, then maybe my work is ready to be published, right? And my work is able to advance the field. And this is when I can publish my work. Something which we should talk about, and I actually want to go into detail in today's session, would be how you can actually look for a journal. Finding a journal sounds really easy, but it's actually not really that easy. And I want to spend the next couple of minutes to really go through this in detail with you. So firstly, when you're finding a journal, you need to start the search by consulting and extending your network. You may want to ask colleagues and peers for their recommendations, right? Sometimes they know of a good journal that they may want to publish in. Sometimes you may also want to get insights from a supervisor, mentor, and author whom you have read about. Sometimes you may even want to book a consultation with your CASESAT librarian, because they would have experience helping other researchers to do this, and they would know which journals to recommend as well. If you want to be more autonomous and more independent, then you can ask yourself, where are the articles that I've cited in my own work, and which journal have they been published in? Sometimes your references would tell you where a good journal could be leveraged on. So you can note the journal's reference in the bibliography of key papers in your field. You may also want to search for authors in your field and discover in which journals they are publishing in as well. So sometimes when you're looking for a journal, you also want to consider what my manuscript format is. Is it an original research article? Is it a review paper, or is it a note? Do I want or do I need to publish this in a Go Open Access journal? People talk about APCs all the time, but you only have to pay for an APC when you're publishing in a Go Open Access journal. So it really boils down to what your priorities are, maybe what your research grants is asking for as well. Are you seeking a title with a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary focus? That's another question that you want to ask. Do you want to publish with a specific publisher? Maybe you don't want to publish with Elsevier. Maybe if you're publishing in electrical engineering, you may want to approach IEEE. But Elsevier has very strong agriculture titles as well. So maybe you are the ones that you want to go for, right? The option is entirely up to you. Are you also publishing research data or other outputs alongside the journal? These are queries that you want to ask. So there are 7 key questions that you want to consider as you evaluate the journals you have identified. Firstly, is the manuscript the right fit for the journal? Secondly, are there any funder or institutional mandates that you may want to consider? Thirdly, is the journal visible in the communities that you want to reach out to? Is there a reasonable chance of acceptance? Is the journal indexed in all of the relevant databases? What do the journal metrics review? And is the journal reputable? And does it include a very robust peer review? All these are queries that you kind of want to ask yourself as well. So I'm going to skip through all this first because I think you probably know about this. And I would really want to focus on the next part of this, on 10 tips on how we can write a truly terrible journal article. So 10 tips, right? And in other words, make sure that you do not do any of these 10 things, right? These are 10 things that you should definitely avoid. So firstly, refusing to read the previous literature published in your field. By not reading the previous literature, you may show a lack of knowledge in your subject area, right? And this is absolutely terrible. Secondly, take the lazy route out and plagiarize. Don't ever do this. You want to be very sure that when you're reading articles, you want to rephrase this in your own words. Thirdly, omit key article components. In this case, if you're missing out on your methods, this would be terrible for your research article too. Next, to disrespect previous publications, overestimating on your contribution, excelling in ambiguity and inconsistency, i.e. by not being thorough, by not being very crystal clear, by not adhering to what you have said previously. When you apply incorrect reference of statements, when you prefer subjective to over objective statements, and when you care little about grammar, spelling, figures, and tables, and sometimes when you ignore editor and reviewer comments. The editor Bert Blocken has highlighted some of the major mistakes early career researchers have made when preparing and submitting a manuscript to a scientific journal, right? So if you want to find out more, make sure that you don't do any of this. The next part of the question would be for you to plan and to ask yourself the query, what type of manuscript are you planning? Is it in terms of full articles? Is my message sufficient for a full article? Is this a substantial, complete, and comprehensive piece of research? If it's a letters or short communications, are my results so thrilling that they should be shown as soon as possible? If it's a review paper, these are summaries of recent developments on a specific topic and is often submitted by invitation. Sometimes your supervisor or your colleagues are also good sources for advice on manuscript types. So please visit the journal homepage that you want to apply to, right? Look at the aims and the scope of the journal, make sure it's aligned. Look at the types of articles that they're publishing, if they're publishing journal articles or reviews. Observe the readership. Is the readership comprised of people from the same community that you want to appeal towards? Look at the current trending topics in which the journal is publishing. You want to make sure that they trend as well. And look at the editors and the board as well. The next part that I would really emphasize is that when you're submitting your article, you always want to check the guide of 4 authors of the target journal for language specifications. You want to write with clarity, objectivity, accuracy, as well as brevity. The key to successful scientific writing is to be alert for common errors in terms of sentence construction, in terms of incorrect tenses, in terms of an incorrect grammar, and sometimes when you don't use English as well. You want to be very clear about all this. So the publishers do not necessarily need to correct the language of the manuscript. One more thing, publishers do not correct the language of the manuscripts. You want to be very clear and specific on this. And people would always ask, is it possible for you to edit for us? Who can edit for us? Is there a service that you can be editing for us? So over at Elsevier, we do have a web shop. You can go to the web shop at Elsevier, and then you would have to pay a fee for this. We don't do this for free. So before you actually carry on, you probably want to ask yourself, what makes a good, strong manuscript? 3 key things here. You need to have a clear and useful message. You want to write and present your article in a very logical manner. At the same time, the readers need to be able to grasp the research as well. So someone's asked, what is the importance of looking at the published editorial board before submitting your paper to the selected journal? I think that's actually a very good question, Salome. So I would say that firstly, now you're able to identify the editors, and because the editors are the most important people responsible for growing and directing the journal, right? Sometimes you're looking at the CEO of a company before you decide to invest in it. Maybe this is a good way. You want to know who the editors influencing the journals are, what their areas of strength are, what is their area of scientific research. And I would often say, usually when you have a very established editor at the helm of a journal, you can be assured that these editors would want to grow the journal in the best possible way. They want to make sure that the articles accepted are the top best quality as well, because this impacts the reputation of the journal. So editors, reviewers, and readers all want to receive well-presented manuscripts, scripts which fits well within the aims and scope of the journal. So the next part will be, what is the right process to write a paper? So I would always suggest that prepare an outline to start writing a first draft. You want to determine the central message that you're asking and the research questions that you like to have answered. You want to start preparing for the draft version of plots, figures, tables, and images. You want to summarize the main findings and to group them in a logical way. And then you also want to select the references for the paper. This is the outline to start writing your first initial draft. The next part will be to write a first draft with the outlines, figures, and tables as your guides. You want to write this in your own style, quickly and without editing. And you may not want to care about the language quality at this point. So I would say when it comes to this approach, it's up to you. For me, I'm very pedantic about my language structure. So I'll write mine very thoroughly from point A to B to C to D. But sometimes you may not want to put in that much effort in the first place. You want to articulate the research query outline first, and then read it again, and then ask yourself now, when you read your first draft, you're reading it as a critical reader and not as the author, is my main message now clear to new readers, right? You want to ask yourself, am I answering the question which I've put forward? So this is another approach that you can consider. The next process that you can do is to constantly rewrite and to improve your article and your manuscript. Revise the text. You want to improve the order and the logic of the scientific content that you're presenting on. You also want to identify the gaps and to improve any unclear parts. Feel free to remove any double or redundant text that you have. And redundancy in terms of words is a very common thing which occurs in most manuscripts, which also adds on to the word count. So most people would always say, oh, I'm exceeding my word count. You know, is it possible if I've written 15,000 words, is it possible for me to submit it? Well, I would say look at what you have written and see what you can remove first. The adage I always like to use is keep it short and sweet, right? KISS. You always want to optimize the readability to readers, right? You want to correct the language errors. You want to ask yourself, is the text consistent and coherent? Which is very important when multiple authors are writing the text. And you also want to get feedback from co-workers as well as colleagues. When you're writing your manuscript language, your manuscript, you want to probably pay very close attention to the language in terms of tenses. You want to use your tense well, right? In terms of an abstract and summary. Maybe when you're writing your abstract and summary, this is written in the past tense. When you're writing your introduction, this comes across as present tense because this is an ongoing part to a problem that you are trying to solve. The methods, materials, and results are usually written in the past tense, obviously. And the discussion you can leverage on both past and present tense. You want to discuss about what you have found. You want to discuss about a potential solution for it. When you're writing your sentences, write it in short and direct sentences because long sentences may confuse readers. Short sentences would probably look more professional. The average length of sentences in scientific writing is about 12 to 17 words. And one very crucial fact that I always tell people, when you're writing a sentence, use this to convey one idea or piece of information, right? Because you don't want to have multiple ideas in a sentence because this confuses readers. So you want to avoid multiple statements in one sentence. Saying it simple. You want to avoid jargon or complicated words and sentence construction. When you have a choice of words, choose the simpler version, right? Maybe you want to say use rather than utilize, spend rather than expenditure, need rather than necessity. Sometimes making all the simpler version makes things easier to understand, right? And that's a consideration that you may want to take. You will also want to omit phrases and words such as already stated, it has been found that, it has long been known that, it's interesting to note that, it's worth mentioning at this point, it may be said that. If you think about it, all these phrases and words are quite irrelevant. It doesn't tell you anything. These are what we call filler words. We use this in our daily conversation so that we don't sound so robotic. But if you think about it, a lot of this is truly unnecessary. And if you remove this, this would also help you to make sure to get your manuscript within the accepted limits as well. So at this point in time, I don't want to be talking the whole time, and this just makes me a very dull boy. So I want to probably make sure that everyone here can remove the unnecessary words from these components. So it's approximately about 11:38 at the moment. So I'll give you maybe about 7 minutes, right? At 11:45, I'll come back and I'll ask you, what are the unnecessary words that you can remove from these 3 sentences? So take your time to look at this. I'll come back at 11:45 and then we'll go through this in more detail. In the meantime, I'll start looking at the questions that you have asked me. Okay. Peng Li, I think you have asked a very good question in terms of an impact factor. What's the differences between short communications and full articles, and which ones is considered as best for publications or other factors? This is a very good question. I think it really depends on how urgent you want to communicate your research finding across. Because when it comes to short communications, this is something that you want to publish very, very, very urgently, right? That's just consideration. Sometimes you can take a look at notes and conference proceedings, and if you feel that you're able to add on more information to this, you can switch this over to a more full-fledged publication in terms of a research article. So it really depends. And the other thing I would say, it also depends on the nature of your research. If it's truly really exciting, such as a cure for COVID-19, you can publish this as a short communications, and I can promise you the citations will go through the absolute roof. But on the other hand, if it's something else, then you probably want to consider what is the scientific knowledge which you're sharing. And in the case, it also depends on which journal you're choosing to submit to, right? And that's the other question which we were talking about earlier, how crucial it is to find a good journal to publish in. So yeah, hopefully this answers your question. There's quite a bit of considerations, I would say. In the meantime, feel free to type in any other questions and answers that you have in the Q&A chat or the chat box itself, and we'll do our best to address your queries. Hi, Salom. You're asking if the type of articles would affect the quality of the paper? I would say it really depends on your research topic. I think that's the most important part of the question. What it is you're writing about, that is the one that really affects the paper. I understand where you're coming from, but like mentioned earlier, short communications is used to communicate something very urgently. A full paper will be able to explore the query in more detail. So it really depends on what your research topic is about. Thanks, Bunsong. Actually, I think you're more or less on the right track. That's great. We'll do more. We can showcase answers in a couple of minutes, but those are good answers. Interesting. Salom, I'm not sure why. Can you send me the example when you say that they have always suggest a transfer to Helion? I don't think we always do that, but if you feel that you have there are multiple instances of this, please send it over to me and I'll take a look at it for you. I would say Helion is actually one of our open access journals that we are currently promoting, but I'm pretty certain that not all transfers are to it. So let me know if this is a common issue and we'll investigate it. Sometimes it's probably because they feel that the topic might be relevant for it. So without having more information, I can't really comment on it. Okay, it's 11:45 and I think some of you have been very active in terms of doing this exercise. So it's great. So the first one's quite easy, right? They are actively addressing the problem and are in process of planning a series of tutorials. Most of you have agreed. Actively was the word that you probably don't need. The other one that you can probably remove is are in process of. So they are addressing the problem and planning a series of tutorials, right? Short and sweet. The next one will be interesting. The speaker reminded us 3 different times of the fact that he has been studying nanoparticles for the past 15 years. You can simply say, the speaker reminded us thrice that he has been studying nanoparticles for 15 years. Another way of making it shorter and sweeter. The last one is a bit of a mouthful, right? It's more of a trick question. We estimated as much as 12 to 18% of the, depending on the tissue, of interspecies differences in gene expression levels might be explained at least in part by changes in DNA methylation patterns. So this one is a very mouthful one. You can simply say estimated is not needed as much as, correct? Some of you have pointed out it's not needed. Depending on the tissue, might be at least in part. Then restructure it. Differences in DNA methylation could explain 12 to 18% of differences in gene expression. So it's pretty short, it's really sweet, right? I think some of you would probably appreciate this. I want to ask you to do this another exercise again, right? But if you think about this, it is a procedure that's often used. This procedure is often used. These approaches uses different kinds of methodology. These approaches use different methods. There are 7 steps that must be completed. 7 steps must be completed. This is a problem that is. This problem is. These results are preliminary in nature. You don't need the in nature, right? So you can see how words can make it more shorter and more succinct. I'm not going to go through all this, right? But you can probably take a look at this. You can use single words instead of phrases. You can say a number of, you can simply say many. A small number of is a few. We are in agreement, we agree. This is found to be, this is, this are. At present would be now. In consequence of this fact would be therefore, consequently, thus, you know. So you can probably leverage on all these phrases as well. The other part, which I think is really crucial, would be on punctuation. This happens all the time, right? So eats, shoots, and leaves, right? If you add a comma at the wrong spot, you know, the zero tolerance approach to punctuation, you probably find out that, okay, you know, this killer panda eats, shoots, and leaves, right? That's scary. But if you don't actually add the comma when it's not necessary, it really becomes a panda eating bamboo shoots and leaves. One instance. The other example, because we're all Asian, right, and there's a strong level of filial piety, is let's eat, grandma, right? But when you don't add in the comma, then it seems like you're cannibal and you are going to eat grandma. So be very careful of that. So let's eat, comma, grandma. Punctuation saves lives. So just the other day, I was in a WhatsApp chat, right? And I did the exact same thing. And I actually just held myself. I'm like, I do this all the time. I talk about this in workshops and I miss out one punctuation and my entire message was completely changed. So I was like, yeah, I thought it was a good anecdote to share with everyone. In terms of it, you can see about the erythrocytes, which are in the blood, contain hemoglobin. But if you put in this way, the erythrocytes that are in the blood contain hemoglobin implies that there are erythrocytes elsewhere that don't contain it. A very succinct way of looking at this as well. Okay, I want you to maybe type in the chat, maybe not everyone, but maybe a couple of you. What is the general structure of a research article? Maybe you guys can type and share with me. Don't rush. Does anyone want to share what they feel a general structure of a research article is? Okay, so what we normally have here would be on title, authors, abstract, keywords, right? These are what we call the head of the article. For the main text, we have introduction, methods, results and discussion, and conclusion. And then you can see the tail end of it containing the acknowledgements, the references, as well as the supplementary material of the article. So, you know, everyone's favorite is IMRAD plus C, right? So when you're writing your article here, you can see that in terms of a article structure, there is title, abstracts, and keywords, introduction, methods, results, and discussions, conclusions, acknowledgements, reference, and materials. I want to ask you another question here. Thanks, Natapat. Really liked it. Question is, when you're building the article, what should you be writing first? All right. So I would say this is a bit of a trick question. Ask yourself, when I'm writing and building this article, what is the step to be writing first? So I'm going to give you maybe 1 minute to think about this and then maybe type it in the chat box. I like this. It's a very lively discussion that we have so far. I'll give maybe about a couple more seconds. Okay, some very interesting questions. I would say that actually, when you're writing your article, the first thing that you need to have first would be your figures and your tables. You need to have your data first before you can carry on. After you have the data, this is when you talk about the methods, the results, and the discussion. You talk about the methods that you've applied to get the answer. You talk about your results that you have found, and then you discuss about the results. It's only after this that you can talk about the conclusion and you can frame the introduction to the article, right? The reason is simple. You can't write anything without having data, right? And then when you want to talk about data, talk about how you got the data, talk about the data, discuss about the results of your findings. Then you can frame up the conclusion of what you have analyzed. You can talk about the introduction. What is the research question that you wanted to frame across? And then you want to talk about the title, abstract, and the keywords, right? This is actually how you build the article upwards. I think it's really interesting. So let's talk about this from now, a top-down approach, right? Like in terms of a title. So when you're writing a title, it has to be interesting, concise, and informative. You want to use this in indexing systems and databases. You want to allow potential readers to judge your paper. Some journals encourage declarative titles, but descriptive titles remain the norm. Declarative will include selective elimination of messenger RNA, preventing an incidence of untimely meiosis. You don't really want to have that, do you? So, but descriptive will be mechanism of DNA translocation in a replicative hexameric helicus. You always want to delete trivial phrases such as notes on, a study of. You don't really want to end your title with a question mark either. Sometimes people will be looking at this and say like, what is the effect of 367 kilojoules of heat on avian protein encapsulated in CaCO3 in the presence of H2O? Does anyone want to guess what this title really means? So basically, this is really the effect of boiling an egg in hot water, right? When you're hot boiling an egg. So maybe sometimes being too specific is not a good thing, right? Because people won't understand what you're talking about. But sometimes maybe putting it in a more layman way will make sure that your article is being read by the correct community and the audience. It all completely depends. So another way to frame and to write your titles, right? You can talk about preliminary observations on the effect of zinc element on the anti-corrosion of zinc plating layer. This is a mouthful. You can simply say this, effect of zinc on anti-corrosion of zinc plating layer. Short and sweet. Because long title would distract readers, you want to remove all redundancies such as studies on the nature of, don't use expressions such as preliminary. You want to be very precise. Other ones would be the actions of antibiotics on bacteria. And this is way too general. So maybe you want to talk about the inhibition of growth of Mycobacterium tuberculosis by streptomycin. So now inhibition of growth is the action. You're talking about streptomycin, the antibiotics, applying the effect on Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So the other thing that you should ask yourself is, how will I search for this piece of information when I'm designing the title? Because I want to be specific. And now ask the next question. The next thing that you probably also have is, who is the first author, right? General principles for who is listed first. The first author would be conducting and supervising the data analysis and the proper presentation and the interpretation of the results. The first author would be the one putting the paper together and submitting the paper to the journal. Co-author will be the one making intellectual contributions to the data analysis and contributing to the data interpretation. The co-author would have to review each paper draft as well, and they must be able to present the results, to defend the implications, and to discuss the study limitations. I would say the first author is the one who is kind of like the organizer of it, but all the co-authors must be able to present the data. We talk about ethical concerns, and two of the really big ones here will be close authorship, when you leave out authors who have and should be included in the research work, as well as give authorship when you include authors who did not contribute anything. The next part we talk about is abstract, and I think we talked quite a fair bit here today, because the abstract is the advertisement of your article. You want to make this interesting, and you want to be sure to be understood without reading the entire article. You have to be accurate and specific when you're writing the abstract. A clear abstract would influence whether or not your work is further to be considered. You want to keep this as brief as possible, because this is your opportunity to really sell your article. So you want to talk about what has been done and what your main findings are. So sometimes when you're writing your abstract, you want to write this as brief as possible in one single paragraph. You want to summarize the problems, the methods, the results, and the conclusions. You want to write this clearly and easy to be understood, and it has to be accurate, specific, and to be catchy. So please take your time to write the abstract very carefully. Many authors write the abstract last so that it accurately reflects the content of the paper. The next part will be keywords when you're writing it. So the keywords are the labels of your manuscript. You should only use established abbreviations like DNA, H2O, RNA. You want to also look at the guide for authors to look for any special requests that has to be considered. So keywords are important because these are the ones that trends, right? So we talk about how you can make your article visible by search engine optimizing it with keywords. Make sure that your title is short and use keywords. Link this through your keywords throughout. You want to caption everything, including your figures, so that this can help your readers to find your paper. You also want to use these keywords throughout the article. You want to use subheadings, and therefore you want to choose your keywords very carefully. So this really helps because keywords are trending on abstract and indexing databases like Scopus, like Web of Science. Super important. Okay, now we hit the body of it, right? The body of your research work. You talk about introduction when you talk about a brief context to the readers. This allows readers to address the problem, to identify the solutions and the limitations of the study, and to identify what the work is trying to achieve. The introduction is for you to introduce your work to the readers so that they understand what it is you're trying to do. Of course, needless to say, write a unique introduction for every article and don't reuse introductions. Methods. Describe how the problem was studied. You can use this to talk about what equipment and materials were used. You want to showcase and include every detailed information which is reproducible so that people can do the research again. You don't really want to describe any previously published procedures. I get it very often that when people are writing about their methods, they tend to get a very high incidence in terms of plagiarism or instances of very similar words. This happens, right? But the one thing I would say about this is that when you're writing about your methods, try to write it in your own best possible way, and this will really help you. The next thing that people talk about for methods will be on ethics committee, and this is super important. Experiments on humans or animals must follow ethical standards. You need to have a required approval in terms of the manuscript, the cover letter, and the online submission system, and editors can make their own decisions on ethics. When you are talking about results, you want to include illustrations and figures. You want to talk about only data of primary importance. You want to highlight the main findings, and this should be clear and easy to understand. So make sure you only put in data which advocates your study actively. Discussion will be when you interpret your results, and this discussion should also correspond to the results that you've written about. And this is where you can compare published results with your own. Make sure that this is a lively discussion, right? I would say the discussion is actually really crucial when you're writing about the article because this is your chance to advocate your study. You can also use this to talk about previous work as well. So you can talk about how previous works help or they don't help, or what they agree with and what they don't agree with. But this is the point of the discussion where you can talk about why this happens. So you want to be very careful to not make statements that goes beyond what the results can actually support. You don't want to use new terms that are not defined or mentioned in your paper, right? So the discussion has to be a summary of what you talk about. Conclusion is where you talk about justification for the work and you explain how your work advances the entire research field. You want to talk about how this compares to previous work so that you can suggest future experiments to take this work moving forward. References are when you want to showcase that you've absorbed the material that you've read about. Don't use too many references, which is unnecessary. Use only the necessary ones. You want to avoid excessive self-citations, and you want to conform to the style in the journal guides for authors. But last but not least, you want to acknowledge your advisors, financial supporters and funders, proofreaders and typists, as well as suppliers who may have donated materials. Okay, so we talked about cover letter early on. Let's go through this in more detail. The cover letter is your chance to speak to the editor directly, and it's submitted along with your manuscript. You want to talk about what makes your manuscript special to the journal. You want to know any special requirements. You want to suggest reviewers, conflicts of interest, and you do want to make this short and sweet. So when you're writing this cover letter, you want to make sure that you're getting final approval from all the authors. So Professor Schmidt, and close with this paper, you find a submission of a manuscript entitled Mechanoabsorptive Creep Under Compressive Loading. This is an original paper which has neither previously nor simultaneously been submitted anywhere else, and both authors have read and approved the final version submitted. Talk next about the research paper. Mechanoabsorptive is denoted as accelerated creep. It's observed that the creep of paper accelerates if subjected to a cyclic moisture content, and this is of large practical importance to the paper industry. So now you're able to explain the importance of your research. 3 potential independent reviewers who have excellent expertise would include Dr. Fernandez, Dr. Chen, Dr. Singh. And last but not least, I would very much appreciate if you consider the manuscript for acceptance in the International Journal of Science. So you can see in this case, a cover letter is a very good way to speak to the editor, right? You can talk about it. You talk about what the journal was special. You can suggest the reviewers. In this case, there was no conflicts of interest being highlighted, but you should talk about it, right? Conflicts of interest is very important and you want to declare it. So think of this kind of like a cover letter for a CV, except it's a cover letter for your research work. So use your chance to speak to the editor directly. You want to submit this with your manuscript. And you also want to mention about what makes your manuscript special to the journal. So I think this is actually really useful as well. When you're choosing the right journal, we talked about this earlier, and I want to emphasize this again because I think it's really important. You want to make sure that you can aim to reach the intended audience for your work. You should only choose one journal because simultaneous submissions are not allowed. I can't begin to emphasize this. Make sure you submit your article to one journal at a time. Your supervisor and colleagues can provide good suggestions. Then you should shortlist and investigate them accordingly. So I was speaking to one of the editors, Hank Pushker, and he was actually sharing with us what he would look at when he's looking at an article that's submitted over to him in terms of a title. Do I understand what the paper is about? Is the title informative and appealing to a large group of readers? Because sometimes a very poorly chosen title is a missed opportunity to connect with your audience. The abstract has to be written in line with the title. You want to indicate the general significance of the research. You want to talk about the aims of the study, the results which are described in detail, and the conclusion in a broader perspective. This has to excite the editor so that he wants to read the introduction. The next phase will be on introduction, because this is not about what you know, i.e. knowledge exhibition. You want to identify the gaps in current literature, right? What are the holes there is? How your work explains the urgency to fill in the gaps? what your paper would do to fill in the gap and what is your aim. So now you want to excite the reader so that they want to finish reading the entire paper before doing anything else. When you're showing figures and tables, you want to use clear standard deviations with explanations. We are science journals. Data should not be of micrographs, images, or photographs of test tubes. So whatever you present has to be direct and relevant. Under results and discussions, the editors want to see what data the author has added in terms of the results and how it fits in and forwards the field itself under the discussion. The references, the majority of the references have to be to the field or to the journal itself to be specific. And last but not least, he will, of course, read the cover letter which you submit to him to find out what it is you're talking about. So assuming that you've gone through all this, right, and then now you receive what we call a major revision or a minor revision. So major revision, I would say, is don't despair when you get a major revision because the manuscript may still finally be published in the journal, but significant deficiencies has to be corrected before the acceptance, and this involves textual modifications or additional experiments. Under minor revision, we're talking about the manuscript is being has to be published. It has to be good enough to be published, but you need to still clarify, restructure, and to shorten the elements in the manuscript. It's very seldom that it's expanded. But the other thing I would emphasize on, when you do have a minor revision, it does not guarantee acceptance, but it's only accepted if all the points are addressed. When you're writing the revision articles, it requires two documents. The first is the manuscript highlighting the modifications made following the recommendations which you received from the reviewers. The second is a letter listing the author's responses, showing that you have addressed all the concerns of the reviewers and the editors. And these two documents must be drafted very carefully. The authors of the manuscript can agree or disagree with the comments of the reviewers, although, agreement is usually encouraged, but you are not always, as the author, obliged to implement the recommendations. But if you choose to not do it, you should, in this case, provide a well-argued justification for their course of action. So yeah, so be very careful with the major and minor revisions here. So eventually what leads to an article to be acceptance in this case, attentiveness to details, you checking and double checking your work, considering the reviewer's comments and then replying to them, writing your best possible English in terms of a grammatical perspective. Presenting this is important. Take your time with the revision. Make sure you're really, really good to go before you submit it. Acknowledge those who have helped you. Your work has to be new, original, and previously unpublished. You should always critically evaluate your manuscript, and you need to obey ethical rules, right? Yeah, this is something that you should really pay attention to. We all know that the entire journey to having your article to be published is a long and arduous one. People are not always out to get you. Although, these are your friends and you assume your peers and you assume that they should want to help you, but it may feel like that sometimes, but life is hard. But if you go through all these trials and tribulations, it's possible that your paper will finally be accepted. So, couple of questions, I think, before I go on. Let me address this first. I would say it's inhibition of growth, yeah, instead of growth inhibition. But, well, it really depends on the full sentence, yeah. Oh, someone's asking about ethics committee, which I'm about to cover right now. Okay, so I would say when you're writing this, right, you should always get them to fill in a form as well. So sometimes the countries may not have ethics committee, but I think sometimes how you really want to do this is to make sure that you want to disclaim it and to get a form to make sure that it's adhered to as well. So that at the end of the day, when you're interacting with human beings, you're doing research about this, you always have this ethics statement as well in your article. Kevin, let me know if you want to add on to this.
No, I think that's pretty much everything.
All right, thank you. Okay, so when you're talking about other ethics allegations, right, apart from the study itself, there are a couple of things that we want to talk about here. In terms of confidentiality, in terms of the information about the peer review process and ethics allegation, this is very, very sensitive. The authors will have the right to due process. We talk about some terminology matters like a paper withdrawal, paper rejection, or paper removal, as well as editorial independence, where the editors make final decision with support from the publisher. So there are many different types of ethical statements that we can cover in brief today because we are running out of time. So we know about research fraud when you fabricate and falsify the data. Plagiarism is also really, really important, and you can see that this really occurs very often. So plagiarism, be very careful, make sure you don't participate in it. There are some times when you submit a paper to a journal and you have nominated reviewers that do not exist, or they may be fake reviewers, or basically reviewers who really exist in real life, but you're giving an alternate email. You may have violated some standards in research. You have undisclosed conflicts of interest. You may have disputes in authorship. You may be publishing your article simultaneously elsewhere. There may be a duplication in terms of publication. You may actually take up and do what we call salami slicing or manipulate your citation. These are all types of ethics cases that you have to be very careful about. So the other thing that I would also want to point out to would be to take a look at the ethical considerations when you're doing a peer review. So first and foremost, when you get asked to review a paper, you need to ask yourself, does the manuscript fall within my expertise? If it's not, I should leave it to someone else and I should decline to review. And if I know anyone, maybe I can tell the editor to consider other candidates. Some other things to consider will be timeliness. Can you return the review within the specific deadline? Because careers depend on this. You want to take this seriously because your review will help the authors to improve the quality of the research and to contribute to the quality of the journal. You want to avoid bias. You don't want to review a manuscript with a strong feeling about the authors. You should not be intimidated by the task because it's likely that you've been asked to review because someone values your expertise in the field. You should always respect the confidentiality, not to talk about the manuscript, the methods, or the results with outsiders. You may even want to review the anonymously because different review types will have different types of peer review, single blind, double blind, etc. Something that you can consider is to use cross-check. This is an original detection service. It pulls from a large database of articles and it alerts editors to any similarities between the submission and the database of published articles. So do's and don'ts. Make sure that when you're doing your work, you need to contribute substantially to the design of the work, the acquisition analysis, and the interpretation of the data. You want to draft the work or to revise it critically for the important intellectual content. You want to make sure that you're involved in the final approval of the paper to be published, and it's to be accountable for all aspects in the work. Under the first authorship, once again, the first author conducts the data analysis. They put the paper together. The co-authors are the ones who makes intellectual contributions. They review the drafts and they need to present the study itself. Sometimes you may want to correct the record, right? You have expression of concern, which is a temporarily inconclusive evidence. A corrigendum occurs when there are honest mistakes and the author is in full agreement. Withdrawal occurs when there are articles in press and it's becoming less frequent due to article-based publishing. You retract it. Rejection occurs when there's an infringement of professional ethical codes, and this is very serious. Removal is an extremely limited number of cases when it's a clearly defamatory article which infringes others' legal right. And replacement is even rarer, which violates patients' privacy and is the identification of false or inaccurate data that, if acted upon, would pose a serious health risk. So we have come quite a fair way, right? And one of the tools that I really want to share with you would be Researcher Academy. This is a really, really, really powerful tool and platform that you can come online to basically leverage on as well. Researcher Academy allows you to go through all this from research preparation, writing for research, a publication process, when you want to navigate the peer review. You can go through all this itself and it will help you to grow as an author, wanting to learn more to improve the quality of your work. So maybe Caroline has something that she would like to share about Researcher Academy later. I'll leave her to it. But think of this as a Coursera, and I think it's really useful as well. You can find more information here online that I'm willing to share with you. And yeah, thank you so much. So this is a point where the floor is now open where you can ask me any questions. So please feel free to do so. So Peng Li is asked if some articles have a similar form of writing in the methods and materials and methods. Should this be considered as plagiarism? I would say no, but at the end of the day, you should always use your own words to write about the materials and the methods. And this would be a very crucial way in avoiding it. So let me know if any other questions in the meantime. This has been a fairly active chat and I really like this. So I don't think you actually do a literature review for publication. The literature review is for you when you're doing the analysis for your work. We don't really accept literature review per se. We talk about journal review articles. And journal reviews usually occurs when you're a subject matter expert and people approach you to write about the journal review, about the topic itself. So that's more of a review article and not a literature review, to be very specific. Thanks, Alfred. Does anyone else have anything else to ask? Yep. I think that's what we're talking about, journal review articles. Yeah. Okay, Salomon's asked, what would be the reason for rejecting the article by editor without but request for transfer? I would say normally when the editor rejects the article outright, the desk rejection, this happens from a couple of things. One, if it's not aligned with the aims and scope of the journal. Two, grammatically is incorrect. Three, what is the scope of the study? So those would be the three main reasons that journal editors would reject an article at desk. Maybe we can take one last question. I think this question so far have been pretty good. I do like this. Well, if not, I would please do us a favor. I believe that KULC has also asked you to fill in the survey. So please fill in the survey forms from both Elsevier and from Kasesat, and will help us a long way as well. So I would say for the first publication, you can try doing the tips that I've been shared with you as well. I think this are tips that many different publishers have shared, and we think that these are probably the best practice for writing your first publication. Always make sure that you are tackling a very good research question that's not been covered before. Your research is original. You want to present your methods in the best possible way, to write it in the best possible way, to be very critical reader when you're writing your own work, and then to adhere to the methods step by step, to which I've shared you before. So hopefully that would help you. And really good luck for your first publication. I know it's not going to be easy, but I can promise you when it's published, the satisfaction is immense. So Alfred, usually when it comes to journal review articles, the authors are the ones who are approached by the journal itself. The reason for this is probably because you probably would need some time to establish your reputation as a subject matter expert in the topics before the journal editors would actually approach you first. So I would say most of the time, start writing more and being an expert in your area of research, in your topic, write a couple of papers. Eventually someone will approach you because you have shown that you know your work. So yeah, that's one way to actually be approached to write your journal review articles. Okay, Kevlin, I'll pass the floor over to you if there's any other comments that you'd like to add on to you. So over to you, Kevlin.
Hi again. Thanks very much, Nicholas, for sharing knowledge with us. I hope you guys at Kasesa University appreciate this, and I hope you come away with knowledge that will be useful for your research writing, right? I don't think there's any further questions, but if you do have after this session, please feel free to email to me or email to Mr. Nicholas or even to the library of KU. Together, we learn from each other all the time, and it's only good to make us serve you better, understand you better, and you can be happier doing your research. So thanks everyone for the session today. Please waiting for a couple of days and check your inbox. You will see the links to the survey, the handout, and also the recording of this session. Okay, until next time, I hope you guys take care, enjoy your research, and good luck with your first publications. See you. Thanks very much for joining.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Good luck with the first publication.
Bye-bye.
See ya.